In late September of this year, over 30 of us gathered in Atlanta to create a force to expand the knowledge of spellers who are using a letterboard or a keyboard as a way of communication. We support many types of modalities and are backing up the information with science and experience. Last month, in the first of our series, we explored some of the basics of presuming competence, the different spelling methods, using a letterboard, and apraxia, known as the brain-body disconnect. Today, we will be digging deeper into the motor science, the conditioning effects of ABA, and why AACs, being more independent, are therefore considered by misguided professionals to be better because they require no support. We'll talk about that ableist demand for independent communication and why it doesn't work for many non-speakers. This and so much more. We are so glad you have joined us. First, let me introduce you to our incredible group. We have Sarah Intonato, Natalia Meehan, Libby Ingram, Becca Kramer, Katie Asher, Eileen Amal, Austin Moore, and myself, Betsy Hicks-Russ. Welcome. We are so excited to be here with you. Katie, in our last episode, you spoke about myelination, and your knowledge of the brain is so tremendously expansive. So could you explain the differences of how neurotypical brain and maybe an autism brain learn, and why we have to first really understand and grasp myelination before we go any further?
Okay, so the way that the autistic brain works versus a neurotypical is they learn everything all at once. So imagine if you were taking in the entire visual spectrum, as well as the different sound that every single piece of light spectrum made, plus the different texture and dimension of every single bit of energy all at once. You would be able to absorb much more information in actually a more complete fashion than someone who is neurotypical, who has to study one piece at a time and go over it over and over to learn it. That's how the autistic mind learns versus the neurotypical. So what they do is they actually learn more and greater in a smaller amount of time. So they're taking in a massive amount of information. What that does is it actually causes them to be overwhelmed. It's not a lack of learning or even a lack of comprehension. It's a massive download all at once. A lot of times they want to receive things auditory as opposed to visually because their visual field is so overwhelmed. Most of them have photographic memories, so they're taking in so much information. So you know how they'll test and they'll say, in the third paragraph on the second line, well, if you've just literally taken a photographic picture, you've got that entire thing. To pick out that one line and then try to dissect it the way that the test wants you to dissect it will be an extremely exhausting proposition for someone who's taken in so much information. That's overwhelming. This is why they prefer the auditory. But motor is not an example of comprehension. And that's what we have to understand. All motor is an example of how to get the output. It's just a collection of the ability to motor plan your body in different ways, whether that's speaking or pointing or any of these different ways. And it requires motor planning. The ability to comprehend is separate from the ability to move. The way that the brain works is it's normally a sensory motor loop. We absorb sensory information, we dissect the information, we coordinate a motor response, and then our body, this is the motor part, actually executes the motor. That's what's going on in the neurotypical brain. In the autistic mind, because they don't have the ability to motor plan, they easily get stuck in sensory loops. And so they're constantly seeking out a sensory need to fill. So the normal sensory motor loop is replaced because they don't have the ability to motor plan. It's replaced with impulsive or myelinated motor. So what ABA tends to do is they make them repeat. It's not their own motor. It's what the coach wants them to do. And so they keep repeating that same motor over and over again. And that's not intentional motor. That's myelinated motor. So ABA is actually making their condition worse because it's limiting their motor to what the coach wants them to do. And then the coach is calling that's their real expression of themselves, but it's not. It's actually just what they've done over and over and over again. What we have the ability to do is to do something that we've done over and over again or coordinate new motor. They lack that piece. And so that's what we're trying to do is come in and give them access to 26 letters by pointing, which is a gross motor, very basic, so that they can communicate what they actually want to say, not what somebody has forced them to do over and over again.
When I'm teaching art and I see a loop forming with a child, I'm very quick to scramble it before it turns into something. I unfortunately fed some of John Paul's loops early on, thinking I was getting rid of them. And the worst one that he had was constant vocalizing where he was just, and it was very loud. I tried different ways, and one of the ways I tried was to kind of wear him out with it and say, "Jump out, let's do it 5 more times. Let's do it 5 more times," to try to make him sick of it, which was actually the worst thing I could have done. I have videos of me even trying to do that, thinking that this would be it, this would wear him out. Oh, no, it just mildly that sheath. I was just pouring, you know, oil onto the gears and making it even more quick and more accessible. And people just don't understand when they see that stuff, they see it as goofy behavior or they see it as maybe a cognitive issue, but it's not. It's a motor planning loop. It's a loop that has been done over and over, and it's so well versed. It's very hard to break them when they start.
In my background in relationship development intervention, one of the things that was enormously helpful to me as a parent and continues to be helpful is to call out the pink elephant in the room and really looking at, well, what sensory channel is this loop satisfying? So if my son went to go put something in his mouth, it was really helpful to just say, hey, did you need to use something in your mouth? Would that feel good for you? And then replace it with something that's more appropriate. Or if you went to go pinch and grab someone, oh, did you need to use your hands for something? And then redirect it into giving sensory gratification, but in a more fulfilling way. And every single time he would get a little fulfillment and then he would put the thing aside. But he didn't need to go back into the loop in that same obsessive way. So it was a way of acknowledging, hey, I see you have this need. We're not going to pretend it doesn't exist, but how can we address that need in a way that does not become an OCD loop for you? Because as I learned from Soma, once you're down that rabbit hole of an OCD loop, it's hard for everyone to get out of it. The child, the caregiver, and I use the word child because my child is a teenager, but I also mean for adults. And it's so much easier for everyone involved just to redirect that energy in a productive way without being condescending about it.
With the spelling is we're standing in a field of tall grass, and when we walk across that field, we will kind of see this path that we've created. So that's what we're doing with this slow poke is we're creating these little windows of a path that we can then keep going through that same path, and all of a sudden it becomes a trail, and then it becomes a small road, and then we cement that road to where that automatic poking is this super highway of communication. And so the myelination is you paving that road over and over again to where it becomes automatic.
The brain loves complexity. And this is why we need things to be so robust and so unique and changing them all the time, which is why repeating the same thing over and over is actually not healthy for the brain because the brain loves complexity. That's how the brain starts to stimulate itself in order to gain some ability to produce intentional motor is from that complexity. The other thing that Sarah was pointing out that was so awesome about sensory needs is we don't recognize is that their sensory system is processing very uniquely. And it's not even that they're all processing sensory the exact same way, but they are processing it differently than we do. And the whole thing about like oral, like chewing on something, well, most people don't realize that actually a lot of people have these oral like ways to stimulate their brain. They chew on pens, they chew their hair, they suck their thumb. Why? Because that actually triggers the vagus nerve, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body, which actually helps you to process and motor plan and think critically.
And the more you spell with your child, the more you, because John Paul have a loop of that, on one side of the board, the RST, he would go straight to that and kind of go. And so we had to get to where, nope, I had to take the board, put it back down and let him start again because loops will form on the letterboard and parents will get concerned their child isn't understanding or doesn't know how to spell when actually it's just a loop. They can get stuck to one side. So you have to learn how to scramble that as well, or it becomes a thing, even with the letterboard.
I'll turn the board upside down or sideways, change the direction of the board
Yeah.
constantly. So they're actually having to really think and motor plan.
I run into many issues with yes, no all the time. And I always tell my parents, don't give them a yes or no, because the yes will become that myelinated, quick response, impulsive, and not thought through. So scrambling with the letterboard is good.
Yeah, for some people who are unfamiliar with loops, I think many of us have heard the term neurons that fire together, wire together. And another good term to remember this is practice doesn't always make perfect, practice makes permanent. So the more times you do something, the more automatic it becomes. And we can use that to our advantage and to our disadvantage when being of support to non-speakers, because we know that they can easily get stuck in these automatic loops. And it's so important to remember that this is not intentional. And I think what Katie and other people are mentioning is looking at it from a bad behavior or non-compliant point of view can be really harmful because they can't help it. What Austin was saying, we can use it to our advantage when working on spelling, because part of practicing in the beginning with that intentional, purposeful motor is being able to go reliably to the letters, practicing over and over again, and making that become ingrained and automatic in their bodies so that they can then use the 26 letters for infinite expressive ways to communicate themselves. And I think that's super important to remember, not to judge the loops, but to be there to move through them. So many non-speakers bring that up as maybe the number one thing that is challenging for them. So this is an ongoing topic, and I'm so glad that we're talking about it.
While we're talking loops and motor control, I just want to mention the anti-spelling research. And unfortunately, the way this is being interpreted is that by training motor, it's being assumed that that training motor is actually training the cue, training the partner of what to select. And so for anti-spellers and people that are misinformed and they're observing lessons, they see the supports and they assume that this essential training of the motor is responsible for what they're claiming is cues, which we know it's not. But visually, and for someone who doesn't understand the physiology and everything that goes behind this, it's interpreted as a cue.
Okay, Libby.
Prompt therapy is actual manipulation of the mouth physically. It's like if you're going to say B, you might, all the prompts in prompt therapy, the prompt technique, every sound has a prompt and you physically touch to like I might go b, and so I'm touching the child and working, but that's acceptable. And that's actual physical touch forming the sounds. But yet, so it's there's so much contradiction. It's like you're allowed to touch an A, C. The goals are written, you hands on, and then you slowly start taking those away to partial assist. So to me, it's so contradictory that you're allowed to touch and touch and touch for this and this, but for the letterboard, it's almost like what's going on here? Because to me, this is so much less invasive.
It's so critical how discordant it is, how it's so okay to provide a prompt in all these other settings and all these other ways, but specifically for spelling, don't touch, don't do, there's no prompting allowed. And it's because we've got studies showing partner influence, and they needed an explanation for what was influencing them. And they just chose the prompts. And they're like, well, the prompts must be what's causing the influence. And they didn't prove that wasn't actually shown, and it's not supported by evidence. It was just an assumption. So I think that's a really, really important point, Libby, that that
In
level of
AAC,
prompting is
yes,
allowed.
I agree, Becca. In AAC, the issue is you always know the known. It's like there is no open. It's
Yeah.
the teacher might, they're touching, but they already know they're always working on knowns. And that's what they go with for the most part. They don't ever let the child make a choice, because then they wouldn't know. So how we start with spelling, and we start with knowns. That's how spelling starts, and we gradually move to, you know, more open-ended, semi-open. But in AAC work, it's like, we're going to go outside. Do you want to go outside? We're going to go outside. So then they go to the button, go outside, and they're hands on, but they always know the known. They're doing motor planning training, I guess, somewhat, but it never goes to an unknown. So it's always a requesting machine. Chicken nuggets, grapes. It's never
Right.
meaningful communication.
Well, that's perfect segue into the next question that I have, is going into the topic of they're trying to teach rapid responding, not thoughtful responding. So let's talk about AAC devices and how they're teaching the body to hit something rather than really access open communication.
So with AAC devices, and I'm not against them, my son took to it really well. He didn't have a problem with the picture functions at all. He didn't stim on the device. It was easy for him to use until they asked him to type on it. And that became a completely different experience. But I want to point out that very often, not always, but very often, AAC device training happens in an ABA setting. And ABA settings involve teaching compliance. And compliance is not co-regulation. Compliance is not critical thinking. Compliance is, to me, neither good nor bad. There are important moments in life where you want to teach your children how to comply, like looking across the street before you walk over it, right? This is important. But in a learning environment, that's not the same thing as critical thinking. And so when you take compliance and you add in a reward-based system, which is very often done, you're very essentially doing exactly what we just talked about with the myelination. You're training motor pathway to the right answer. What do you want? Oh, go outside. What do you want to eat? Chicken nuggets. It's always very rote. And when you say something like, how do you feel? Happy, and you're rewarded for saying happy, that becomes a pathway in itself. And very often you have students who are trained to not think critically about how do I actually feel, but students who are trained to look for the right answer. And that's completely different skill than asking yourself, how do I actually feel in this moment? Which then often translates to a student having a meltdown. I hear this all the time. And they're handed their AAC device. Someone says, how do you feel? They clearly do not feel well. And they push the button happy, not because they don't know any other feelings that exist, but because they've been trained, this is the right answer. But it's interpreted that they don't understand other feelings, or they don't know how to use their device properly. So then you have a bigger conundrum. People are making assumptions based on someone's motor plan that they've now created with how to get the right answers, which are reinforced, instead of thinking critically about how they feel or any other question that's being asked of them that could have an open-ended response. This spills over into spelling when you start asking students open-ended questions. How do you feel? And many of them have so much anxiety because they don't know what the right answer is yet, that they will do what my son did, which was give you 100% accuracy with academic questions for months and years, but really take a long time to get through that anxiety around thinking critically and using reasoning skills and making choices. So I don't think AAC devices are bad, but I think we have to look at not just what they are, but how they're being taught to the user, because that's creating some good and some challenging outcomes that we have to think of in a much more detailed way.
I think what Sarah said is absolutely 100%. And what it does is it takes away the child's autonomy. And autonomy is what they so greatly desire. They don't know that they are allowed to have autonomy. I think sometimes like it's just easier to say, I'm happy.
Houston made a really great point. We did this presentation. He had a representative of the different types of pictures that would be available to him. And what this is an assumption that the person putting together the pictures has thought of everything that the person wants to say. So there's this presumption that I know everything that you're going to want to communicate. And what he said, he held all those pictures up and he said, which ones would you use to say, help me, I'm trapped? And there's so much more that they want to communicate than these scripted processes allow them to actually communicate.
Becca, I'm really interested from the scientific point of view of why this independence is so powerfully sought after, to have an independent method. That seems to me like it's the pinnacle of communication, is that to be able to do something independently. Is that how they see it?
I think that this could stem from this being in the hands of teachers and speech language pathologists, because from a learning perspective, like from a school perspective, the goal is independence in school, and because you want to independently give someone information. But what we're dealing with is this is not independence. This is medically essential. This is accessing their consciousness. This is so much more than just showing you learned something. And so I think maybe that's where it got scrambled in the beginning, is it was being viewed through the eyes of teachers, and so independence was always so sought after. But now we're seeing it similar to, well, if a deaf person requires sign language, if someone requires a translator, if anything, we don't, independence is
Chair,
not
a
like a wheelchair, like
wheelchair, crutches.
yeah, it's so that's why I think it's so important to say this isn't just learning, it's medical, it's nervous system regulation. There's so many aspects from a pure learning perspective that you just can't look at it that way, that it's so much more than that. And that, yeah, independence, I can understand how that's the goal, but I even have to ask, is it so essential that they get to this independent typing if it is so challenging?
I wanted to talk about independence because I think, especially in our Western culture, we have this like fixation with independence and hyper individuality and like rugged individualism and doing it all on your own. And, like that's just ingrained into us from a young age. And I think autonomy is being able to do what you want to do and contribute in your own life, even if that means having support. And for many of our non-speakers who we love and we work with and we spend every day with, the reality of our lives is that they need support with so many different things, whether it's crossing the road or getting dressed or going to the restroom or just making sure they're having a safe, comfortable life. And that shouldn't be demonized when they have an effective means of communication. That's their choice, regardless of anyone else's opinion. And I think it's really important to call out the ableism in that because of all those other examples that were just provided. Like, you wouldn't take away support from somebody else whose disability warrants that support. So I think it's super important to talk about that. Like, why are we just striving towards this independence? What does that even really look like in a non-speaker's life? And who is that really for? Is that for them, or is that for the neurotypical discomfort around their life and what is actually needed?
I love that. And it reminded me of how someone learns to swim. People don't just jump in the water and swim independently. And yet everyone forgets this when it comes to communication through a letterboard or typing. How many swim lessons did you have to go to learn how to swim? If you learned as an adult, how many swim lessons did you have to go to? I bet it was way more than if you were a kid. And yet people have this ridiculous expectation that everything in communication should be independent. And yet some of the most important life skills that we learn as humans, learning how to drive a car, learning how to swim, even learning how to brush your teeth when you're a toddler, you don't learn those things independently from the get-go. You always have support along the way. But now what we're seeing in this community is people wanting to validate the end result, the independence, without acknowledging what needs to happen in order to get to the independence. It's like saying, don't take any swim lessons, but just jump in the water and go ahead and swim. It makes no sense at all. And this is leading me to my other point around the AAC device. And I don't know about all of our listeners, but every time I bring up using a letterboard, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, there's a keypad on the AAC device. Just use that, right? But from a sensory standpoint, there's so much happening that is different that people who have typical sensory development don't notice. This is a sensitive touch screen. It has different lights. It makes sounds. Letterboards don't do that. It has different surface areas that you have to figure out and work with. And it makes it so much more challenging for someone with motor issues to point to a letter and be accurate and do so continuously versus a letterboard and a low tech approach that makes it a lot easier. No one's saying that you should never use a separate device to type, but it may not be the easiest entry point. In fact, letterboards and old school keyboards are a lot easier because of that alternative sensory development.
The 26 letters are infinite possibilities of what they can say. So many people are being cut off with using an AAC device that pretty much only gets them the nouns or the verbs or maybe a few adjectives.
I've had one friend in particular, this was an adult that was aging out of school. He had an AAC device that they gave him and he had used for many years. The school relied on it pretty heavily. And towards the end of his tenure at school, he started getting more and more aggressive. And they would ask him on the device, what's going on? What's going on? And he said, I can't stand this thing. It's making me irritated because all I can do is say the same thing over and over again. And yet he was able to explain that through the typing because he had infinite neural pathways to get his thoughts out, not just this 3-button touch.
As this is something that's happening, is that parents think that it is going backwards to get on a letterboard versus an AAC device. And that is huge because they don't understand it's actually limiting to be on the AAC device when you just have pictures. And they think just because the keyboard's there, they would be using it. And it's so much more complicated than that. It isn't going backwards to use a laminate board. It's actually moving your child forwards. An AAC device is not the solution necessarily. I mean, it's great for certain things, but that's been a big thing. It's not going backwards.
With the letterboard, it's also an easy place to build your sensory tolerance. And when you start adding in more sensory variables like lights and sounds and reactivity with buttons, that can take a lot more practice and endurance. And the letterboard is an easier place to build. And it's also an easier place to get to know the student and what their sensory needs are, so that when you start adding in keyboards, there are endless types of keyboards that you can use. Some might have visual support, some might have tactile supports. It's so much better to get the understanding of how the student operates first so that you can provide them with the right tech supports when it's time. Otherwise, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks because every learner is so different.
Eileen,
I couldn't agree more, like, with all of it. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So what we don't realize is with a limited number of choices, it could be, okay, because the motor system doesn't work and I can't just tell you what I'm thinking, it could be thought, okay, automatically this is what I'm going to touch, right? Even though it doesn't convey what I'm actually trying to say. So with the letterboards, like, definitely what Sarah was saying, like, these guys are dealing with so much overwhelm anyways. So we don't even understand, even for a typical person, like blue light being so highly addictive and like that dopamine hit, like just in the beginning, the less the better. But to actually access your conscious thought and be able to, even for a typical person, to speak it out loud, it requires a certain emotional safety and stability. And for them, accessing their conscious thought and being able to take that thought and put it on the board, I mean, in the beginning, the best way is with the letterboard. And also, the practitioner understands that. Like, the practitioner understands this is what myelinated motor looks like, but this is what purposeful motor looks like. And it is my job to create the conditions to be able to replicate this type of thing so they can have access to that purposeful motor.
I'd like to actually expand more on that visual end of things with the blue light, because I know in my own personal experience that Joey doesn't like any sort of a device that it has a blue light backing. And Katie, you've talked before about all the challenges that Houston has with sight. Can you expand on that?
Almost all of them say that they're extremely sensitive to energy and they're perceiving more energy than we are, right? And the devices all use energy, like they have to be turned on. They're literally emitting energy. Most of them are receiving and transmitting Wi-Fi signals, which is a whole nother subset of energy that they're having to process. So we're actually creating more obstructions to their communication when you introduce the device. And, and then of course, visually, they're seeing triple of everything. There's all kinds of energy that's going on in the background. There are they're taking in all of that data. The data that's constantly running on your computer, they're taking all of that in. So that's making it extremely emotionally and intellectually overstimulating for them. The thing about the letterboard is I don't know why there's this prejudice towards the device, as if the letters on a device are valid, but the letters on a letterboard aren't. I'm confused by that. Can somebody tell me what's the difference? I was in this one superintendent meeting with all these, big wigs, and I held up a letterboard and keyboard. I said, which one's the alphabet? Which one? Because they're the same. And this idea is there are these prejudices towards technology, as if something being more technical makes it more valid. And in reality, if you are having to process so much more information, the less that demand that you're putting on the motor is actually the one that's going to give you the best way to communicate authentically.
I just have a couple quick questions to wrap up today that we received from our first episode. What do you say to a parent who can't find a practitioner?
I am a parent who couldn't find a practitioner. So I decided to become one for no other reason than to help my own child. I had no desire to work with any other students at the time. I just intuitively knew this was the right next step for us. And I actually didn't do it right away. I spent months, probably years, trying to find a provider near me who had some type of availability. There were none. And eventually I just threw my hands up and said, it's time to go do this myself. And it was the best thing that ever happened in our lives, all of our lives, in our whole house, because now my son is a member of the family and he talks to everyone in the family. We don't have the dynamic of he can only talk when he's in the provider's office. And that's something I coach parents through every day, because I meet a lot of parents whose kids have a voice now, which is an enormous blessing, but they don't yet have one at home because the parent doesn't feel confident enough yet. They've been told for years probably that they aren't an expert. They don't have a degree in education. They should just leave their child to the experts in autism. No, parent, you are the change maker. It's going to take some work. I'm not going to lie to you there. And it's work that's worth doing. So we are all here for you to help you go and do this, because it is the best work of your life.
I became a practitioner to teach Houston because I couldn't afford one. So same kind of it wasn't that I couldn't find one. I could find one, but I couldn't afford the lessons or the sessions. They were just too expensive. And so I did it myself. And that was before Houston, he was still in school. So he didn't have any, waiver funding or anything available at that point. And I'm so glad that I became invested in his communication so completely, because it gave me the confidence that I knew it was his voice. And you don't have that whenever you're not investing in it, you question, because there's all this fear and doubt and anxiety. But when you're the one doing it and you know that was their spelling, gives you a confidence in their voice and in their intelligence that you can't get from somebody else telling you. And it takes that doubt away, which is so tremendous to their ability to authentically communicate. And Communication for All is a free resource online that anyone can access. It's got all the progression, all the explanations. It's got lessons. There is support available. We're available for y'all. Like, there's so many coaches out here. We don't want anyone to feel like there is any obstacle to communication. We will help you. We will do whatever we can to get you trained so that you can communicate with your child.
I just wanted to say that, after JP passed, we started our charity for called lovejohnpaul.org, and it's a website, and it's for parents to come on and to hear our story and to see all the resources out there. They just can get on there and they can see all the different methods. Communication for All is on there. It's a work in progress. But I created it because I wanted parents who lived anywhere to be able to jump on and to learn about spelling, learn about the different methods. And I want it to be something that parents can get strength from.
Okay, I wanted to real quick just address Gestalt language processing, because that question keeps coming up repeatedly. And what you have to understand is that is a way for unreliable speakers to use scripts to try to get a point across. It's their basically it's an alternative for them, because they do have some scripts and they're trying to use those scripts in a way that's appropriate to communicate something. It's kind of like an aid. It's not the best. You still want to navigate and develop as much intentional motor as you can to communicate anything you want to say, but it is an aid and it needs to be looked at like that. For example, if someone used a line from a movie that was appropriate, that was a way that they used a script to communicate something intentional. But it's not intentional language with the full capacity of limitless possibilities. And so we still want to work on infinite possibilities and not limit ourselves to scripts.
One other question that we had was, how often should you attend sessions? People were asking about the ideal frequency.
I would say as much as possible. If you can be spelling every day, spell every single day, all day long, if it's an option. But as much as you can, and like everybody's been mentioning, empowering yourselves as parents, as family members is so important, so that these non-speakers can access their communication at home all hours of the day, and you don't have to rely just on being somewhere randomly or like once a week or twice a week. But also, working with practitioners, I would love to come together in this group and just with people listening to find ways to create scholarship opportunities and get people to practitioners financially as much as possible, so that can also be an option for families too. But that would be my suggestion, as much as possible.
It's fantastic.
Sarah does a wonderful support for parents as well. Sarah, I think, should talk about, because it's so good, I think, what Sarah's doing.
I totally agree, Sarah. To talk about your program.
So once a month, I lead a free community support circle. I actually have one in a few days. I have one every month, and it's a commitment that I make to the community at large, because still at this day and age, we're seeing parents suffer from isolation. And that to me seems ridiculous, because it's the age of the internet. Autism is 1 in 34 kids, and yet we're still seeing families, because of the lives they lead, be so isolated. So once a month, you can join me and my community on Zoom, and Austin always shows up and brings his expertise as well. And I'm so grateful for everyone coming and supporting each other. And we have parents come who have questions about getting started with spelling. We have parents come who are afraid their child has too many behaviors or too many OCDs and can't spell, and we support them through it. And from there, I offer a group called Autism Changemakers, which is $29 a month. And we talk about spelling in that group every single day, as well as all the other things that we face as parents of non-speakers. But it was really important for me to offer up some low-cost, easily accessible options for parents, so that no matter where you are, you don't have to do this alone. And just today, I was speaking to a client about the isolation she was feeling. And, humans, until very recently, as Natalia so beautifully put, lived in tribal cultures. We didn't do life alone. And yet now we're seeing these families walking through some of the most challenging things a family can experience, feeling like they are completely alone. And you weren't made to do this alone. That's what I want everyone to hear. You were not made to do it. No human was, but especially when you're going through something challenging, it's so important to lean on people. And for now, this is a virtual place for people to lean on one another. And I'm so glad. So join us anytime, because you don't have to do this alone. There's nothing wrong with you if you feel like you're breaking from doing this alone, because you weren't actually designed to do it alone in the first place. And now we have options for you. And all of us are here to support you, as everyone has said, in all the different ways that we know how.
I will put in the notes of this show, Love John Paul's site, Changemakers, because Sarah, I refer somebody to you every single day, and Communication for All as well, because I want to make sure that they're in there.
I just wanted to say a little thing about how often. Think of it, because what we're doing is we're developing regulation and motor. And so think of piano. You have to start on the scales, right? You start just basic, trying to get your eye and your hand to do the same thing, right? This is exactly what we're working on with pointing. And so how often should you practice piano? You
Perfect.
should practice every day. You've got to get those basics down before you can build up the more complex motor. So I just encourage everybody to do it daily, even if you're just pointing and spelling. Just work on the motor.
And purposeful movement in general, like putting dishes away from the dishwasher, anything that requires any sort of a crossover.
especially complex.
And stamina.
Mhm.
Stamina is a big deal, because that was one thing that it's so exhausting for them to have to work on the motor. All of it is draining, but you can build up stamina just like you're building up for a marathon. I mean, if I started trying to do a little bit every day with JP, some days look better than others, but I think parents need to take a little pressure off themselves and not get so anxious about it. I feel the anxiety in some parents. They're so nervous, and they don't need to be. This is just something fabulous that you know about, that you can do with your child, that it's so rewarding. And it doesn't matter if it looks terrible one day, or if it's just 5 to 10 minutes one day, another day. I think whatever you do towards it is going to help.
Just the encouragement and the isolation and everything else. And one of the things that parents feel so much about their child, I hear this a lot, is, well, my child has these behaviors, my child has this and everything. And I just want you to know your child does not have behaviors. Your child has an unruly body that they don't have control over. That is an out of control body. And I want you to know that's not them. That's their body. Don't put meaning in it. And don't let that be a barrier that you use to not pursue communication.
Perfect. Austin?
I was just going to add, that's one question I get a lot, is how often. And I tell my parents that spelling is not a new thing to try or a therapy to try. This is a lifestyle to live. And so if you're working with someone currently and they're not giving you homework, you need to tell them to give you homework. Because every session that I have, especially the very first one, I will tell my parents, okay, this is what I want you to do when I leave. And I'll be able to tell the next time I see that person, especially months down the road, if they're working at home, because the flow will start getting quicker or the accuracy is picking up. And so 5 minutes a day is what I tell my people, even if it's spelling new and novel words out of your favorite magazine. Any kind of thing you can spell with your student daily, as long as you're mixing it up and keeping it fresh, you can do this, but it is a lifestyle that you have to start learning to live. It's not a therapy to try.
I have so many other questions on my notes, but it's just the demand for yet another episode. So we will be continuing this once a month and bringing you more in this series. I need to wrap this up today. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this. We are just all very encouraged by how often this podcast is being shared. And we loved co-creating this with you. And thank you to my incredible team, because you're all rock stars to me. We'll be back with you next month. Thanks and have a great week.